Hello, Galarian. Welcome to Online at 6. This is the podcast where you get to hear a group of nerds cover fun concepts, wacky builds, and interesting Pathfinder 2 rules, mechanics, and subsystems. We'll debate, argue, make terrible puns, and hopefully produce some kick-ass content that will blow your mind. I'm Savity, a lovely gnome cleric of Desna, reporting live from a gourd home. Today I'm joined by...
I'm Green Meadow, your friendly local immortal Leshy. I've been through it all from Earthfall to the fall of Lastwall, so you could say I know some things.
Hey, hi friend, it's Saphira. Sorry, I'd love to talk, but I'm way behind on my studies, so I gotta get back to this book.
I'm Nock, the local dwarf alchemist, here to make anything you need.
I'm Liam, owner and purveyor of the local magic item shop and full-time lich.
And in this episode, we'll be discussing rules lawyering.
So today we're going to discuss rules lawyering, and more so how you can uniquely blend the rules and your playstyles to make the game personalized and customized for your group that you're playing with.
Yeah, I think our group has found that balance over the years, but it has taken years to find that balance. So we're just trying to share some of the stuff we've learned over the time. And I think rules lawyers get a lot of shit online about, how bad and terrible they are. But our group has a particularly good rules lawyer. So we'd like to share kind of what makes him effective and what works for our group, and maybe it'll work for yours as well.
I think first we should actually go over what we think a rules lawyer is. What is a stereotypical rules lawyer?
Ooh, this is good. I like that.
I think that's a pretty debated topic, actually. I think online you tend to get a definition that's pretty negative, and it's someone that's, bringing in the rules and just like being so rules focused that nothing gets done, and it's very argumentative. To me, a rules lawyer is someone that just kind of knows the rules like a book and can just pull out anything in their brain. And we'll sometimes debate what the rules
and not
are.
all of us are like that, right? Like not all of us can pull that information from our head, but it's about I feel like it's also about leaning onto your group to, as a collective, understand the rules.
Rules lawyers get a bad rap for possibly diminishing the fun of the party, bringing rules into it, making things more restrictive and making everyone else not have fun. But I think that there's a way to bring in rules so that you can heighten the fun that everyone has in a way that's not restrictive.
And it keeps the whole game fair, right? So it's knowing the rules and knowing when to bring them in. It keeps it an even playing field for everyone, GM and players included.
As we're kind of looking through here, we have a lot of notes we're going to be coming back to. So let's get started with one note that I have written here. When to be granular with the rules and when not to be. So can anybody think of any experiences that they've had where it's like being very specific with the rules is important or not very important that you found?
So for me, I'm the GM, so combat is when I'm most focused on the rules. I think combat is kind of the most interesting time to be granular and not with the rules too, because there's times when things are really important. There's times when characters' lives are on the line, and if you're not sure about the rules, it could lead to character death. But then there's times where you're just having fun. It's an easy combat, it's a low threat combat or a moderately threat combat, and you're just having fun. And at those times, I think the rules are less important. So for me, when rules are important, especially in combat, is when they're narratively important. When, something is going to make more narrative sense, even if it goes against the rules. I'm more likely to break away from the rules or lean more into the rules if it makes narrative sense. When a character's life is on the line, I go by the book. And that's when it really matters to go back by the book.
I think especially for our group, when we transitioned over from 5e, we felt a pretty severe difficulty spike, especially the first half of the first AP that we played. There were definitely a lot more times where our characters were actually faced with death, and we weren't able to sort of complete all of the, save all of the NPCs and defeat the bad guys and escape unscathed. And there were definitely some times where it was really important to follow those rules exactly, because we've definitely had some fights where we barely skirted away from a TPK.
Yeah. Some of the best fights.
For sure.
I like the
Well,
ones where we
Mayan.
win.
Also, in the beginning, you don't want the rules to kind of stop your play and make it so you're stopping every 5 seconds to look up the rules and you're not having fun because you're just so worried about the rules. So I think there's also going more into the rules as you go, and that also comes with just leveling up. But especially in the beginning, I think you can focus more on having fun and learning and being okay with getting things wrong, and then eventually just learning more and more, but never just stopping your play completely and making it unfun.
I think that's actually a great point, Green Meadow. That was definitely something that I personally found a little frustrating at the start as I was learning the system. And we've kind of had this discussion ourselves. We don't think Pathfinder is a crunchy system, but it does have a learning curve as you're getting into it. It's got a lot of very specific language that you need to know. And so that sort of stop and start was a little frustrating, but I think we got to a good balance where we decided, okay, we'll look up the rules, but for this will be our ruling for now. You make it very clear that it's a temporary ruling, and GM has the authority to go back and change the ruling, should we reinterpret sort of that particular passage of the rules. And that was kind of, I thought, a good compromise as we were learning these rules, because it kept the pace of play going. But ultimately, as you said, the more you play, the more you understand the rules, the more you sort of just train your brain to read the logical rules, like the way Paizo has written them. So trying to find that sort of balance of, okay, this is the ruling for now. We can come back to it at a later point and revise it should, we find additional evidence to support, the other option.
And a quick note on that, I feel like one of the strongest things we learned it actually took us a while of playing to kind of get this down, but when to just take a break and say, all right, we'll come back to this later. Or, when there's a big rules question we're all looking at, when to say, all right, we're not sure right now, we're going to rule it this way and move on. I feel like that is, for me, the most important thing of effective rules lawyering is knowing when something is really worth a high level of granularity, like somebody's going to die or live versus, if you're doing 3 damage or 5 damage because of some random effect, then you can just say, all right, we're going to roll it as this and move on. I think that really helps speed games up, and I cannot recommend it enough for anyone else out there who maybe finds themselves in the thick of the weeds frequently.
I think that ties very well back into our GM's point where, death can be on the line along with, having to stop every 5 seconds, especially in the beginning where, we want to follow the rules more strictly rather than making more of a moral choice because we're just starting out. You can standardize things instead, so then you can have those issues, those situations where you can be the hero, but still not be able to save everybody, but not feel too guilty about it because it did follow the rules. You were playing the game how it's meant to be played, and you have a story that you can then follow, a narrative that our GM can then use and bring up later down in the story. So following the rules to granularity can help standardize things so that later on you have that standardization to go back to and for morally, I guess, in your party as well.
That is the most lawful good take I've ever heard on rules lawyering. Usually that's my role. Usually I'm the lawful good one. So that's interesting.
I do like something you brought up there a lot where you mentioned rules lawyering for the ease of later, saving time. So let's look at the rule now so we know it, and I feel like sometimes we do that where we're like, all right, we're going to look it up, but then we got to remember it, guys, for next time. And the more we do that, the quicker we've sped combat up. And our combats now are really fast. I hear a lot of complaints online from folks saying that, combat might be slow for them. And I think that's pretty typical when you first start the game. But as you learn the rules, and if everyone in your party, dedicates themselves to, figuring out the rules or to their best ability, then we can hope that as a team, as you grow, you'll get those down and be able to move things along more quickly.
Yeah, I think you have all kind of gotten to the point that I think is most central to me is that those conversations need to happen.
Yeah.
Like at some point they need to happen, because whether it be in the middle of a combat, after the session, if you never have that conversation about where you fall on this particular rule set and what your group is cool with, then you're going to continue to have those issues come up in every combat or every situation, and you're going to break the RP, or you're going to break the combat, and you're going to have to pause. But also you have to figure out what works for your specific group. I think we're not unique in the fact that we have a group of people that are some more rules heavy, some more rules light. And, we've had to strike that balance. We have someone that I think we would all call a rules lawyer in the most traditional sense in our group, who knows that book backwards and forwards and can tell us what we're doing wrong. And we've had to figure out a way of getting that information out there in a way that still lets other people play their characters, other people do what they want to do and not grind things to a halt, while also, respecting those that don't care as much and just want to play the game, just want to have fun, and
want to watch a story unfold.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Just want to watch the story unfold.
Well, Savity, I think you bring up a good point, and we were already kind of talking about this, but when to interject. So actually looking from, as a rules lawyer, if you do know the rules or you know that something's going wrong, I think it's very important to know when to interject and when to step back, because it might not matter. So I think that that's also a balance that's hard to find, but is very helpful, because sometimes it's not going to help things go forward at that moment.
Yeah,
I think that goes into not overruling the GM.
Yes.
So that's one of the biggest rules. As a rules lawyer, you have to know when to overrule the GM and when not to, which is never. You never want to overrule the GM.
Yes, please never overrule the GM.
They are the purveyors of the game, the key keeper. All right. If you bring up a point, bring up a rule, and they consider it and still say no, you got to say, okay, GM, because you're the GM.
Yeah, and you might not have all the information that your GM has. They might be like, you take 2 damage. You're like, no, I should be taking 5 damage. And it's like, no, they know something that you don't know. Don't interrupt it. Yeah, just let it roll, or double check. Hey, did you get this? I considered that. Yep. Okay, move.
Yeah, almost every time I decide to go against the rules, it's for a narrative reason. I don't think I've ever chosen to ignore the rules for a reason just because I wanted something to happen that wasn't narratively great. If there's a moment that I think should happen, then we're going to let it happen, regardless of what the rules say. But on the other side of that, as GMs, make sure that there's a reason why you're going against the rules. If you're just going against the rules willy-nilly, then your players don't really know what to expect or what to really do with this situation. But if you're going for a reason, then they'll trust you later on, and you'll be able to have their trust and faith that you know what you're doing.
I think that's especially important for people who homebrew to keep in mind. We play mostly APs, so our GM has a set narrative, but those whom homebrew, they need to make sure they are the driving force for the story. So keep that in mind, that they are the ones creating the story for you, and they have their reasons for what they're doing.
For sure. And I think in a system like Pathfinder 2, where, we have the benefit of more granular rules where we can see, exactly how interactions worked out. Sometimes it's easy to get caught in the weeds of things. But once again, we already made all of these points of, the reasons why maybe you don't always need to be doing that. But I think within the Pathfinder 2 player base, this is especially important when we have the luxury of all of these extra rules, when to know and to take a backseat with them, and when to, really put the gas pedal on.
I think that also brings up a great point about Pathfinder 2 and just a lot of games as far as making rulings on rules. I mean, Pathfinder 2, there's a lot of clarification on the rules, but some things do just end up not clear, and just assuming that the game was not built broken.
Yes.
Knowing when to just sometimes rules just need to be altered a little bit, and that's okay.
On that note, for the love of God, Paizo, please make the die queue a monk bow. We all know it's meant to be a monk bow, but it doesn't have the monk feat, so technically it doesn't work with my monastic archer. So
Give
Let's
us
get on
some
that, all right?
damn tattoos.
Level 1
Tattoos.
tattoos.
Give me some arcane tattoos. Oh my goodness gracious. Don't even get me started on that, people.
Aside from that, though, I think there needs to be a trust in the system. I see a lot of people coming into Pathfinder 2, like on the subreddits and things like that, wanting to homebrew immediately. And
Yes.
you don't know the system yet. You don't know what works, what doesn't for your group. Because there are definitely groups, I think, that are more leaning into homebrew, and that's totally fine if that's what works for your group. But you have to at least give the system a chance and give it some time, work with the system a little bit before saying, okay, this definitely does not work for us.
Yeah, because 9 times out of 10, when I see posts on Reddit of somebody that has an issue with the rules, it's because they don't really understand the implications of the rules. And I do feel like sometimes that's one of the harder things to grasp about Pathfinder 2. And a note I have written here down is rarity tags. And I feel like there was at least a lot of discussion within the community about what these rarity tags mean. Some GMs say, yeah, it's uncommon, you can't have that. While others understand, and this is my personal thoughts, that the uncommon tag just means ask your GM, right? It means double check with your GM to make sure that this is okay, because for one reason or another, whether it be something narrative or maybe access wise, you're going to have trouble getting this item in the game, but that doesn't mean it's overpowered. That doesn't mean it's broken or anything like that. It's just a little note that the designers left to say, hey, just double check with your GM about this.
And I think I mean, a bunch of us have uncommon. We've got some rare feats and ancestries that are in our games. How did we have some decently codified rules that we use at our table. Did we come to those via a discussion, or is there some sort of guidance in the books? I forget exactly how we came up with our rules for this is like how you get an uncommon rune for your weapons. This is how you get a rare background for your character.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has been my personal judgment just as a GM, but I think we did work together on, deciding what was overpowered and what wasn't when we started out playing Pathfinder 2. I know for sure I usually lean on our rules lawyer a lot for making those decisions because he understands the rules way better than I do, frankly. But I do usually have kind of a 1 or 2 rare items per character kind of rule that I usually use as my judgment point. Uncommon, usually, as long as it makes narrative sense, I'm okay with it. That's usually my basic point for uncommon, is does it make narrative sense? Usually they're not overpowered. I don't think I've run into many uncommon things that are overpowered at all. Usually it's the rare ones that are a little more concerning. So uncommon is just more story-wise. It's uncommon to me. I think that's the judgment I usually use. And then for each character, it's going to depend on whether it makes sense. 99.99% of the time with uncommon things, I say yes. So, it's more just make sure I'm aware of it so I know what's coming.
And so what that makes me think of as far as how our rules layer kind of really helped with those deciding factors is not only does your rules lawyer know the rules, or where to find them verbatim and what's written down, because they know the rules, they know how the system works. So something like that.
The implication of the rules. Yeah.
Right. The implication of the rules. So they're really helpful in clarifying things that might say things that are up to your GM, or, a lot of things in Pathfinder 2, it does say under GM discretion, but a rules lawyer is really helpful in making sure that those decisions go with the game, go with your group, and go with what Pathfinder 2 intended, so it's not game breaking or just something that doesn't make sense. They know how the system is supposed to work.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important to consider that. Yeah, typically if you're playing with a group that's been around the system for a while, understands it, or even just a GM who's in that position, they have a full understanding of the game. And that's so important. And that's something that comes with time, I think. And that's important to recognize, is that you're never going to be an expert at everything all at once. And a lot of times when people look at Pathfinder 2, they see a very complex system. But the truth of the matter is there's really a small fraction of the core rulebook that you actually need to read in order to understand and play the game well. And the rest can, come from your party or come from the GM as well. But it's about figuring out what you need to play the game and then slowly figuring out the game from there.
Yeah, I mean, as a GM, I know almost nothing about making characters. Like, sometimes you guys will come to me asking about certain characters' decision. I'm like, let me look it up, because I genuinely have no idea. And that's something that I trust you guys with. Like, I don't think the GM should be this, universal arbitrator of the rules in that they know everything, because I certainly don't, and I don't
Agree.
think most GMs do. So, know your part, know your character, know your, the things that your character wants to do. You should know better than the GM.
I think that's also a good reason to have a rules lawyer to help out the GM and the players, because the rules lawyer knows how certain rules in character creation, and then also like how monsters or combat works, how they interact with each other.
Yeah.
So, the rules lawyer has all the facts and the rules already memorized in their head, but you want a good rules lawyer who can think critically about how those things interact with each other. So then when you do have to come up with new things, like in our Shrinks to Thousands campaign, coming up with the relics and what are we going to use for our masks, our rules lawyer really helps with that, because he knows how things are going to interact with our character creation, how they're going to level up in the future, and how we can create the best character we need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've leaned on him a ton just in that specific situation. I'll throw out, like, this is what I'm thinking, and he goes, that won't work, or I think that's fine, or something that I've limited ends up being totally fine, and I'm just full on trusting him at this point, because I think it's really cool narratively to have something like relics in the game, which is a subsystem we haven't played with yet, and so it's all new to all of us, but I trust that he knows what he's talking about and isn't going to break the game.
Even if it doesn't work, according to the rules, he knows, okay, but maybe try this instead. That does work with the rules.
Yeah, one good thing I think a rules lawyer needs to learn is when rules as written and rules as attended actually matters, and I think ours specifically does. He finds some hilarious things that happens with rules as written, but would never bring them to the table. And that is huge.
Yeah, I think what's also cool is your rules lawyer can help put mechanics to your flavor, because I am bad at remembering all the rules there. Paizo is great because they have really gone into detail about a lot of things, but that means I can't remember pretty much 80% of it, I would say. So what I really love is, I'm like, this is what I want, this is the flavor, this is what I'm thinking, how can we get there? And so that's something I really appreciate about a good rules lawyer.
Yeah, our rules lawyer has come up with some of the most amazing things that are maybe not certainly raw, but they still fit within the box of the rules. And that gives me the confidence to approach our GM for some things that maybe I would have been like, oh, this goes against the rules, and maybe I shouldn't bring it up. But then now I feel like, okay, yeah, I can bring it up to our GM and then see if it'll fit in the rules and just give a little bit of flavor or something.
I like the way that we're talking about our rules lawyer right now. Like, we got him on Amazon. 5 stars on my rules lawyer. I would recommend it for everyone. For the audience listening, our rules lawyer is not one of us here, but is another player in our campaign who really, really helps, as we said earlier, us understand the rules and play better.
I give them a perfect 5 out of 7 score.
Oh, perfect.
Ooh. Yeah, it's funny because our rules lawyer, I think, is the person I make the most exceptions for, which is not the general sense that you have around a rules lawyer. Usually the rules lawyers is very raw, by the book, and, he comes to me all of the time with things, I really want to do this. And usually it's an uncommon or rare thing, like we were talking about, because he knows those really nuanced things and wants to integrate them into his character. And usually I just trust him and say yes. And I've had conversations with him where I'm like, will this break things? Like, just straight up, will this break things? And sometimes he's been like, maybe. And so I go, no. Usually he's not trying to break things. So
Yeah, and a larger part of the discussion that we're having right now is, what does system mastery look like, for the party? And I feel like the more you play the game and the deeper system mastery that you come to develop, the more you can make these little, you take a deeper look at certain elements of the game and see what you want to keep exactly as written or what might survive a little tweaking.
Our rules lawyer will sometimes say you don't know a system until you break it.
Something about the system that I don't think gets talked about a lot is how flexible it actually is. I mean, it is a game where, yes, if you throw a +3 modifier on something, it's going to have major implications on the game. But little things here and there, making certain allowances in collaboration with your GM, make sure you have this conversation, you're talking about it, tends to be fine. And as a role, it doesn't matter what system you're playing, I would say small tweaks, if a system is worth its salt, then small tweaks to any system should be fine, and especially if they help you more enjoy the game, which is another thing that we've been circling around this whole discussion as well, is like how do we use the rules to better enjoy the game? So something that someone brought up earlier was subsystems. One way I think that Paizo is integrated, looking at the kind of micro of the rules, is with some of these subsystems. Is there any that jump out to anybody immediately?
For me, I use the influence system quite a lot. Finding points and earning points towards a social encounter in order to pass the social encounter. That's something that a lot of APs will do automatically, which we run APs, we run through APs, so that's what I'm used to. But I'll use it for other things as well. Just in my head, have you earned enough points to pass this encounter?
And to that note, I think there's only been like 1 or 2 times we've known that we were using that influence. Usually you do that all kind of behind the screen, so to speak.
Oh yeah.
So we are just literally role playing and doing our playing the game, and you are like, oh, you threw enough parties in your dorm, influence point with
Exactly.
the other party people in your dorm, right?
And that speaks to system mastery as well.
Yeah, I think once everybody really knows the system well enough, you can do those kinds of things. Because I remember the first couple of social encounters that we went through, we had a discussion on like what actually happens here, like what's going on behind the screen.
Which I enjoyed. More people should do that. Yes.
Yeah, so I think the first time we ever used it was in Age of Ashes. I'm gonna keep spoilers down, but you guys were having a social encounter with like a board of representatives for a city, and you guys needed to earn enough credit with all of them basically to have enough influence in the city to have them work with you. And so I broke down that you were going to have your time to talk, and you give your points and your talking points, and they might have questions for you, and then you would roll a check, and whether or not you pass the check, you might gain influence with them or lose influence with them if you critically failed. By talking through that, I think it helped you guys understand what was going on behind the screen, because yes, it was a roleplay situation, but there were stakes that you guys might not have been aware of otherwise if we didn't talk about that subsystem. And I think it's important to have that discussion so you guys know what is expected of you in this situation. It's not just pure RP for RP's sake, it's RP for narrative sake, and things can go wrong. And I, as a GM, don't want things to go wrong, and then you guys go, wait, what? Like, I didn't know we were in this high stakes situation.
Something I don't see discussed a lot is the fact that Age of Ashes really does do an excellent job of walking you through a lot of the subsystems. One of them, even, I believe it's the infiltration system, is used at one point, and it wasn't even published yet, but you can tell that they snuck it in there to use without really giving it a label. As far as I know,
yes,
I haven't
they
read
did.
Yes.
Age of Ashes, I think, is a fantastic. It gets a lot of shit online because it is a little wonky because they wrote it prior to all the rules being out.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the combats are a little wonky and things like that.
Or
but
difficult.
Narratively and difficult, yeah.
Well, yeah,
difficult.
I'm just saying as opposed to wonky. I don't know if wonky is exactly the right word. It's like some of them are hard, and there are little things which might have not been accounted for because
the rules are a little
system...
off.
Yeah.
Because the system wasn't out yet. But narratively, and some of the subsystems that they integrate make it a fantastic introduction to Pathfinder 2 for both players and GMs. I learned so much running through that. Also running through it with really difficult combats that needed a little work. By tweaking them, I got a lot more system mastery out of that. But then it introduces those subsystems and also just the world that you're playing in to make a fantastic introduction.
Yeah, so talking about the subsystems and trying out different kind of social situations and approaches to playing the game also kind of brings up a point about rules lawyers and trying out rules a few times and not being afraid to go down. So a lot of people are afraid to go down. They're afraid to get conditions, you know, in combat, and they think it's going to make the game harder, less fun. But I think having a rules layer for those times is fantastic because you're down, you're panicking. You don't know what you're going to do. You're trying to think, how am I going to use my 3 actions to get myself back up while still killing the thing? And the rules layer is like, no, I got this. You have this feat, you can do this and this and this, and I can do this, and we can do all of these different things, and it's fine. We'll get through it. Even with conditions, they can think about different things. Hey, we can craft this little potion, this cure to help them out later on. It's okay. I've calculated, I've done the math. We have 3 rounds until we need to actually do something. Don't be afraid to try out those harrowing things because you got your rules layer to fall on.
Just to know, it's okay to die.
It's okay to go down also.
It's okay to go
Don't
down.
freak out when your character goes down in Pathfinder 2. It
will
going
happen.
to be okay.
It will happen, and
It will happen, and you should be ready for. Oh, don't.
And
get
your
me started.
GM is not evil if you die.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that goes to show the importance. This is kind of getting onto another topic, but of talking with your crew before to decide what death is going to look like. But I think that's especially important in Pathfinder 2, where death is always an option for a reason. It keeps the game, for me, it keeps the game paced well. It gives you an investment. Death means something, but it doesn't have to be for every group that's playing. You should have that conversation beforehand. But I think acknowledging that, yeah, Pathfinder is a system where you can die is an important step in that process.
I agree, and I think it's interesting because it's not only just group specific, but we're now playing Strength of Thousands, which is you're playing at a magic school, so I think it's also adventure specific. I know I've talked to you guys about how the first part of this adventure you might not die, and that's not a stake that I necessarily need in this narrative. I don't think it's important in this particular situation. Later on it'll come up, but right now, early on, when you're still in school and being students, they're not going to just let you die. And so that's okay too. But it's just making sure that your group is okay with it. Your narrative, it makes sense in. If you're fighting demons or devils, they don't care if you die, so you should have that stake and you should have that chance of dying. But other times you might not. Great. Thank you everybody for listening. I think that'll be it for today's episode. I think there's a lot of this that we'll come back to at some point, and I'm sure we'll talk about more in depth at times.
We hope you enjoyed getting a little look into the subject of system mastery and what a rules lawyer means in Pathfinder 2. To the group, to the audience, what does a rules lawyer mean to you? What does a good rules lawyer mean to you? And how do you work with your party to make sure that you're all having the most fun in your Pathfinder 2 games? We would love to hear that. Leave a comment. Make sure to like and subscribe, of course.
Yeah, we'll see you in our next episode.
No. Jamie left some notes. Here, Jamie, let's go to your helpful notes. Korean fried chicken. That's the segment.
Embracing the crunch.
You don't
know
know
a system until you break it.
One more time.
That's terrible. That's so bad.
You don't
know a system until you break it. No, that's not working. That's not working.
The one.
That's not working.
This is the bumper I'm using at the intro of the episode.